For those of you who may be here for the first time today, as well as those that maybe this is your second time to be present and you haven't been with us throughout the entire year of 2022, I need to set the stage just briefly as to where we are going to go today in God's Word. You see the title of the message, The Wonder of Emotions, Desires, Optical Illusions. We've been talking about our emotions since January. Not every week, but 3 out of 4. The first weekend of the month, we are focused on a different series that we'll talk about the first weekend in September. But throughout the year, through most of the months, we have explored from a biblical perspective a variety of emotions. And currently, we are focused upon 3 that are referred to in John's first letter, chapter 2. So we're kind of in a little sub-series of the larger series of emotions. In 1 John chapter 2, we read this, "Do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in them. For everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, or as other translations put it, the desire of the flesh, or the lust or the desire of the eyes, and the pride of life comes not from the Father, but from the world. The world and its desires pass away, but whoever does the will of God lives forever." This is the immediate scriptural context that we've been coming back to now for about a couple of weeks, again today and one more time next week. And specifically today, we're going to center our attention upon that one phrase, the lust or the desire of the eyes. The lust or the desire of the eyes. Do you remember it wasn't all that long ago when it was kind of going around on the internet? Is the dress white and gold, or is it blue and black? I see some of you do. You're smiling about that. You recall that kind of an internet phenomena. It was an optical illusion. What color is it? Well, how does that happen where people can see 2 colors and then other people see entirely 2 different colors? You've probably seen, this has been around for a while now. Is that graphic the picture of an older, senior-aged lady with her chin down and kind of has a scarf over her head and then a couple of little frilly things, whatever they are, coming up off of the forehead of her? Or is it the graphic of a younger woman who seems to be looking off to the side and you're kind of seeing her jawline there? How many instantaneously see the graphic of the older lady? How many instantaneously see the graphic of the younger woman? Okay. Optical illusion. Here's another example. Which orange circle is bigger? Is it the one on the right or the one on the left? What do you think? The right? Okay. Well, to be honest, I don't know. But the creators of this particular graphic say the circles are the exact same size. How many legs does the elephant have? 4, 5, 6? As you study that graphic. Oh, wow, I think that's way too many, Alexander. Then here's an interesting one I came across, the Impossible Trident. You see there 3 cylindrical prongs and 2 square prongs. How do they do that? Wow, you've really got an imagination. In this particular graphic, do you see the word hate or love? Okay. Different people see different things. And by the way, there are a lot of these things that you can search out on the internet. So what happens when we see different things from how other people see them? Well, an internet resource had this headline, "When Your Brain Can't Believe Your Eyes." And here are some sound bites that come from that particular article. Your perception of an illusion has more to do with how your brain works and less to do with the optics of your eye. It's not your eyes. An illusion is proof that you don't always see what you think you do because of the way your brain and your entire visual system perceive and interpret an image. An illusion is a mismatch between the immediate visual impression and the actual properties of the object. An illusion is a phenomenon in which our subjective perception doesn't match the physical reality of the world. When the brain attempts to generate a perception, it basically is taking a guess at the near future by trying to fast forward perhaps a tenth of a second. And as a result, there is a neural delay. You might not be perceiving an image as it actually is, but as you expect it might soon be. Well, okay, that's about mumbo jumbo for me, but I kind of get half of that. It's something that we think we want to see, right? Well, let's take some of the highlights of what we just read. Illusions occur when the brain attempts to perceive the future and those perceptions don't match reality. So, an illusion is about how your brain works, how our entire visual system perceives and interprets an image. It's a mismatch between the visual impression and the actual properties. It's a subjective perception that doesn't match the physical reality of the world. There's a neural delay, perhaps. It's not actual, but as it is expected. And it is an attempt to perceive the future, and those perceptions don't match reality. Optical illusions. Do you see any implications spiritually? Do you see how this can apply to spiritual realities? For everything in the world, the desire of the eyes passes away, but whoever does the will of God lives forever. The lust, the desire of our eyes. Earlier in this little sub-series, taken from 1 John chapter 2, we talked about the world. Do not love the world. And someone was visiting with me a couple of weeks ago and said, well, there's a lot that we love in the world. I love the world. This past week, I went to one of the favorite places of mine in the world, the California Sierra Mountains. And there was much that I saw there with my eyes that was very, very delightful for me. Mountain waterfalls, oh, if you could have just heard the roar of the water as it's cascading over these rocks. And I ran into Yogi Bear. I never saw Boo Boo, but Yogi Bear was just off the trail about 35 yards, and he's a little shy, but then he begins to poke his head out. And I can almost imagine that he's having a conversation with Boo Boo in the background. Hey, Boo Boo, do you think those hikers have a picnic basket? I'm going to go check it out. But we didn't give him anything. One of my favorite places, Ray Lakes, looking at the Painted Lady and Glen Pass. And our campsite was just over there to the left, right at the water's edge. Awesome beauty. It's in the world. I love the world. Beautiful sunset as God displays his sky artistry in the evening. Do not love the world? Well, it depends on how we use that word, world. In fact, Sierra said just a few moments ago that Satan wanted to take her out of this world. What does that mean? The Bible uses the word world with multiple applications. And one of the texts that has All three of them comes from John's Gospel, his first chapter. Speaking of the Word, which is Jesus, we read there around verse 10, I think it is, that he was in the world, and the world was made through him, and the world did not know him. You can see very quickly that each of those three usages of world has a different frame to it, a different context. There is the world, which is the dwelling of humans, and I think that's kind of what Sierra was referring to just a few moments ago. Then there is the world, the created universe. Jesus, as the Logos, according to John chapter 1, created the world. All things were made by him and through him. But then the world did not know him, meaning that mindset of autonomy and sin and rebellion. And Jesus referred to the devil as the ruler of this world, as recorded later in John's Gospel, chapter 14 and verse 30. This has led to some interesting songs that we sing in the Christian community, and we referred to this briefly a couple of weeks ago. This world is not my home, I'm just a passing through, my treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue. So the world has a negative connotation in that particular context. But then we also sing, this is my Father's world, and to my listening ears all nature sings, and around me sings. So world is used in a variety of ways in the Bible. And when John tells us in his first letter, do not love the world, he's counseling us not to become involved and attached to the mindset of autonomy, rebellion, and sin. And it is that exact world that God so loved in order to redeem it. Everything in the world, that is, the lust, the desire of the eyes is passing away, but whoever does the will of God lives forever. What we find here in John's letter is actually complementary to much of what we find earlier in the Scriptures. Solomon had these comments of observation. The eye is not satisfied with seeing. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure. Solomon went lusting after what he saw. He's speaking from personal experience. He who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver, nor he who loves abundance with increase. This is vanity. So what profit have the owners except to see them with their eyes? The eye gate is that part of our experiential arena in which we come to want. I want more. It's related to covetousness, an insatiable desire for more, and we are captivated by an outward show of materialism. Look at what I'm wearing, look at what I live in, look at what I'm driving, look at where I go. This becomes the meaning and the purpose of life, the lust of the eyes. In fact, the apostle tells us in Romans chapter 7, I would not have known covetousness unless the law has said, you shall not covet. And there's that Greek word that we looked at a couple of weeks ago, epithumia. But sin, taking opportunity by the commandment, produced in me all manner of evil desire, all manner of epithumias. This is a common challenge for all of us as we are inheritors of a fallen nature from our first parents, Adam and Eve. Primarily, the lust of the eyes is materialism. More and more. I want more. A biblical example of this comes to us from Joshua chapter 7. Those of you who are familiar with the Hebrew history, the children of Israel have just come into the promised land. They've had an amazing defeat of the city of Jericho, a stronghold. And God had given specific instructions, don't take anything from that city. It's all mine. Do you trust me that I will be able to provide for you? So you don't take anything. But a guy named Achan saw among the spoils a beautiful Babylonian garment, 200 shekels of silver, and a wedge of gold weighing 50 shekels. And he confessed, I coveted them, and I took them. He took them because he coveted them. Lot's wife, Genesis chapter 19. Many of us are familiar with this story as well. How when the Lord, because of their wickedness, destroyed the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot's wife looked back and she became a pillar of salt. And that is a specific illustration of what we find in 1 John chapter 2, that the world and its desires pass away. What a sad, sad day that was. Obviously for Lot's wife, but for Lot and his family. We need to take just a little bit of time here to explore how that came to be in chapter 19. When we go back to Genesis chapter 13, we listen into a conversation that took place between Lot and Lot's uncle Abram. They came to a point where they were experiencing so much material wealth in wealth of that day, meaning flocks and herds, that there was not sufficient room for them to continue to be close neighbors. And so Abraham gave Lot the option, where do you want to go to in this new land that God has brought us to? And Genesis 13 tells us Lot lifted up his what? His eyes. He lifted up his eyes and he saw all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. And Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain and pitched his tent even as far as Sodom. I want you to notice the progression here as we kind of drop in on the experience of Lot as it is told in Genesis chapter 13 and onward. He didn't actually move into Sodom initially. He just got near Sodom. And the Bible tells us in chapter 13, but the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful against the Lord. Ezekiel 16 looks back on this experience, back on the conditions that were in Sodom, and notes that they were full of pride, they had fullness of food, abundance of idleness. Kind of sounds like it could be our lives today, doesn't it? And they were haughty, and they committed abomination. They were in need of nothing. We're living the good life. Back to Genesis chapter 19. As God now comes and has a dialogue with Abraham about what he's intending to do. Well, Lord, will you destroy it? If there are 50 righteous people there, I'll spare it for 50. This is actually chapter 18. And the conversation goes back and forth between God and Abraham until Abraham convinces God to spare the cities if there are only 10 people, 10 righteous people. So in chapter 19, God himself visits Sodom. And it's noted there in chapter 19 that Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. Whoa, really? Before he was just like outside the city, but now he's sitting at the gate, which means he has become a person of influence in that city. Later in chapter 19, the observation is made by the original inhabitants of Sodom. This one, referring to Lot, came in to stay here, and he keeps acting as a judge. He came in to stay here. Another alternative reading for that in English would be, he's a resident alien. He's a resident here now. Remember what happened. Lot saw that all the plain was well watered. He pitched his tent towards Sodom. He sat at the gate, and then he became a resident. Now, that didn't happen overnight. That happened over a span of years. But the implication of that is so vitally important for us. where we can make little compromises about our values and our practices that lead us away from an eternal heavenly orientation to a now earthly orientation. Lot gets it. He takes the warning of the angels seriously. And so he goes to some of his family, his daughters who are married, his sons-in-law. And he said, "Get up. The Lord's going to destroy this place." But to his sons-in-law, he seemed to be joking. What? What are you talking about? We don't want to leave Sodom. This is the good life for us. And they didn't go with Lot, his wife, and their sisters. This is an incredible insight into the character of God. The countdown is getting smaller and smaller and smaller to the Lord executing judgment upon Sodom. And the Bible tells us in Genesis 19 that while he lingered, the men took a hold of his hand and the hands of his two daughters, the Lord being merciful to, and Lot's wife's hand as well, the Lord being merciful to them, and they brought them outside of the city. Come on, hold my hand. What amazing initiative, mercy, and compassion of God. How did Lot move from just pitching his tent toward Sodom to becoming a resident? Because of the lust of the eyes. This temptation was also presented to Jesus. We're not going to explore this in detail. Maybe we'll get to it next week. But these three areas of temptation, lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, were all presented to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. They were presented to Jesus near the beginning of his public ministry, and they are presented to us. Matthew chapter 4, speaking of the devil's encounter with Jesus, we read this, that the devil took him up on an exceedingly high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. Now, how did the devil do that? I don't know. The Bible simply tells us that he showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And the devil tells Jesus, "All these things I will give to you if you fall down and worship me." That was a real temptation for Jesus, wasn't it? This is what he had come for. He came to somehow connect with the world, but he's being presented with an approach with that was not a part of the plan that he and his Father had agreed upon. The book Desire of Ages tells us this. Placing Jesus upon a high mountain, Satan caused the kingdoms of the world in all their glory to pass in panoramic view before him. The sunlight lay on the templed cities, marbled palaces, fertile fields, fruit-laden vineyards. The weekends were made for Michelob. You can be young and you can drink to your heart's content and party and have a great time. The traces of evil were hidden. The eyes of Jesus, so lately greeted by gloom and desolation, now gazed upon a scene of unsurpassed loveliness and prosperity. And the devil says, "All these things I will give to you if you just fall down and worship me." The Desire of Ages goes on to give us this intriguing insight. Christ's mission could be fulfilled only through suffering. Before him was a life of sorrow, hardship, and conflict, and an ignominious death. He must bear the sins of the whole world. He must endure separation from his Father's love. Do you see that moment of temptation that Jesus was confronted with? Recall how we've already noted that our desires are fickle. Our desires are often controlled by what we see and what we feel now. I want it now. I want to satisfy this desire now. But that's not a part of God's plan. Jesus knew that for him to accede to the devil's temptation, all these I will give you if you just bow down and worship me, that was not a part of the eternal plan of salvation. That's not how I am going to win back the world. In Luke chapter 12, he says this, I have a baptism to be baptized with, and how distressed I am till it is accomplished. Mark chapter 10 tells us this, behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and to the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him to the Gentiles, and they will mock him and scourge him and spit on him and kill him. And the third day he will rise again. That same chapter, speaking of the temptations of Jesus, offers us this insight. Never can the cost of our redemption be realized until the redeemed shall stand with the Redeemer before the throne of God. That's why I prayed at the beginning of our time together, holy, holy. We don't even understand, we don't even fractionally absorb the significance of how holy God is. We will not understand until we see what Christ left. Then, as the glories of the eternal home burst upon our enraptured senses, we shall remember that Jesus left all of this for us, and that he not only became an exile from the heavenly courts, but for us, he took the risk of failure and eternal loss. But Jesus, you can have it now, because I'm showing you all the glittery, all that looks to be desirable. Jesus chose the cross. And through the cross, we are assured that we have redemption through his blood, Ephesians chapter 1. The forgiveness of sins, according to the riches of his grace, which he made to abound, or which he lavished, or which he showered upon us in all wisdom and prudence. And as the Apostle Paul in Ephesians 1 focuses upon the sacrifice of Christ provided for us, then he prays a prayer for those believers in Ephesus and those of us here in Charlotte. I keep asking that the God of our Lord Jesus Christ, the glorious Father, may give you the spirit of wisdom and revelation so that you may know him better. I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened. The eyes of what? The eyes of our hearts may be enlightened. What do eyes do? Eyes see. See what is desirable, and eyes see what is dangerous, what is harmful. But Paul uses it now in a figurative sense. I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened, that you may see the character of God. And then he goes on to say, in order that you may know three things: the hope to which he has called you, the riches of his glorious inheritance in his holy people, and his incomparably great power for us who believe. This is all in Ephesians chapter 1. You don't begin to connect with all of the spiritual implications here just reading it through one time. You have to read it. What does that mean? You read it again. What is God trying to tell me with this? See, in 1 John chapter 2, we're focused upon the now, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life. What can I experience now? Give it to me now. But now passes away. Ephesians chapter 1 is a contrast to 1 John chapter 2. That the eyes of our heart will be enlightened, that we will focus upon this hope that we have been given in Christ, the riches of his glorious inheritance. Don't even have time to deal with that today. Hopefully we'll be able to come back to it next week. And his incomparably great power for us who believe. What is his hope of glory? A sister letter. Colossians chapter 1, verse 27. Christ in you is the hope of glory. Do you see how the writings of the apostle relate to each other in his various letters? Ephesians chapter 1:20, just immediately after this sentence says, in regards to the power, it is the power that raised Christ from the dead. Oh, that we would have our heart, the eyes of our heart, enlightened every day. That we would be enthralled, that we would be mystified, that we would be overwhelmed, that we would be fascinated, even dazzled and delighted with who God is. So we can play around with optical illusions. We can play around with focusing upon the here and the now. And I'm a typical male. I hate to go shopping. I'm a typical male. You go in, you hunt it, you kill it, you bag it, you get out of the store. None of this, let's go over here. To me, shopping malls are evil places. And I say that a little bit with a sarcastic smile. But in reality, and I'm just picking on a shopping mall, but it's all about buy me more. Now, I can go into a bicycle shop and look around and be just fine. So I have my arena that I have to deal with. We can become absorbed with the here and the now. But what does 1 John 2 tell us? It's going to pass away. Or we can have the eyes of our heart enlightened as we focus upon the sacrifice of Jesus and his incomparable power that arises from his sacrifice and his resurrection. 1 Corinthians chapter 2 tells us this. Eye has not seen, nor ear heard, nor have entered into the heart of man the things which God has prepared for those who love him. This verse is familiar to many of us in the Seventh-day Adventist community. And it is most commonly utilized, articulated, when a pastor or an evangelist talks about heaven. But that is not the context of this verse. You know, sometimes pastors and evangelists can kind of lift something out and put it over here, and it fits. Now, I'm not saying that that is an entirely illegitimate use of this verse. I'm just saying that it's not the context of what Paul is saying here. In fact, this phrase here, that first section on the screen, is actually a combination of two scripture passages that come to us from Isaiah. But when Paul uses this, Eye has not seen, nor ear heard, nor have entered into the heart of man the things which God has prepared for those who love him. He's not talking about, oh, my mansion in heaven is going to be so awesome. And I'm going to have my city home. I'm going to have my country home. I'm going to have my garden. And I'm going to have my ski planet and my scuba diving planet. That's not what he's talking about. He's not talking about all the fun, recreational, travel experiences that we're going to have in eternity, and it's just going to blow us away. No. Look at the second line. But God has revealed them to us through his Spirit. Revealed what? The things that we haven't seen, the things that we haven't heard. Reveals to us what has not previously entered into our hearts as we grow in a love relationship with him. But God has revealed them to us through his Spirit, for the Spirit searches all things, yes, the deep things of God. What this verse is telling us in context is that God will lead us into a relational dynamic, a relational experience with him that maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago, we had no idea could have existed. Are you tracking? Or is this going, phew? For me, do I value this? Do I value this more than waking up at Ray Lakes in the wilderness? I am called to value the relational gifts that Christ has provided to me more than anything in this life. Are you tracking?